Hi friends, hope you are doing well. I'm Dr. Ganguly. Welcome to my channel. So today I'm going to talk about comparison between the J1 and the H1 visa, and I'm going to focus on these visas as far as university systems are concerned. So before I begin this video, I should inform you that I'm not an immigration lawyer, so whatever I'm going to talk are from my own experiences of having got the J1 and H1 visas through the university systems, and also from information I have from the public domain. So for more details on this topic, you should of course confer with the immigration lawyer. So with that caveat, let us begin. Now the first point is that the H1 is dual intent and the J1 is not. So what this means is that when you go for the H1 visa, you can have two possible intents. One is that you may stay in the US or you may go back to your home country. However, in the case of the J1, you are supposed to have only one intent, that is, you come to US, you take part in your exchange program, and you go back to your home country. So that is something to keep in mind. Now, where this dual intent and single intent causes a problem is if you decide to apply for a green card later in US, or even if you want to convert from the J1 to the H1 visa. So in all these cases, the process is much more difficult. You will need to get the services of a good immigration law firm if you ever want to go from J1 to H1 or J1 to green card route. Now the second issue is that the H1 needs a check by the employer on the prevailing wage. So essentially, whenever you are going to be issued the H1 visa, the university system has to figure out what is a typical wage for a person who is going to take your job or with the job description, and then they have to match that prevailing wage. However, if they are giving you a J1 visa, they can essentially give you whatever is considered to be a reasonable salary for that position concerned. So most of the time the J1 salaries are going to be considerably lower than what you are going to get from the H1 visa. So this is something you need to keep in mind, that the J1 pay can be low and it's often a pretty subsistence wage just to allow you to study and do your work in the US. However, in the case of H1, you would need to go through the process of figuring out how much is the typical salary for your position and so on. So in many cases, the H1 would require the services of an immigration lawyer, whereas the J1 visa can just be obtained if you show the DS-2019 form, which is given by the university to the US consulate or embassy, and they are going to give you the J1 visa. So J1 is easy to get. Now, where universities are often willing to give the H1 is if they are hiring somebody as an assistant professor, associate professor, or professor, so in more or less permanent positions where they are giving them competitive salaries. Where they go for J1 is where they are hiring postdocs or PhD students. So essentially, these are more like stipends, so it's easy to get a J1 visa for such people. Now the third point is that the H1 is typically a 3-year visa and then it is renewed for 3 more years. However, the J1 can be there for up to 5 years. So most of the time the J1 is initially given for the period of time for which you go to the US to do your education or so on, and sometime it may be renewable up to a maximum period of 5 years. So that's something to keep in mind. Now the fourth issue is that the H1 visa does not have a return to your home country requirement, but most of the J1 visas which are issued by the US consulates and embassy can come with a 2-year home country requirement, which means that if you are on the J1 visa, you have to do your work in the US, then go back to your home country. Now this is under the case where your home country has made some regulations that you are in certain coveted professions, maybe engineering, science, or research in some areas, and they feel that they want you to go back. This is especially true for people who are coming in the medical side of the equation, which is often a case that your home country may be bereft or deficient of doctors, so they want these people to come back to the country. So the J1 home country requirement, if you have signed this particular place in the DS-2019 form is very rigid. It is enforced very thoroughly, so make sure before you take the J1 visa that you are cognizant of this home country requirement. Now H1 doesn't have any such requirement because it's a dual intent visa. You are free to come to the US and work for 3 years plus another 3 years if you can get an extension, and then you are free to apply for a green card and go through that process if you want to do so. So that's something to remember. Now there are some cases where it is possible to get a waiver to the 2-year program, and again you have to request the home ministry in your home country to essentially give you this waiver. So this can be an onerous process in many cases, so keep that in mind. Now the next point is that J1 is easy for the university or professor to give you. H1 is much more difficult. That's because the paperwork in the J1 is simpler. They simply need to issue to you the DS-2019 form. They can pay you a reasonable salary, and that is good enough. But in the case of H1, this has to be a real good job, and this job has to pay you a pretty high salary, and they have to make the case that they could not get any US citizen or permanent residence for this job. So H1 visa is often much more competitive, and typically people who get H1 are somebody who is involved or is in a more permanent position. So essentially it could be something like a assistant professor job, associate professor job, or even in some cases a research scientist position, which is very much required by the university. So again, the professor has to make the case that hey, this guy is really required by us for our lab, by the US system in general, and then you may get the H1 visa. So that's something to keep in mind, that J1 is easy for the professor to give. Now the negative side, of course, is that the J1 may be easier for the professor or university to give you, but it may not be the best visa for you, so keep that in mind. Now the next point is that J1 has certain advantages in terms of tax, and this of course depends with the tax treaty signed between your country and the US, and you need to look into that. So in many cases, if you are on J1 visa, you may not be taxed, or you may have a lot of advantages in terms of tax. So again, the university is going to give you this information if they are paying you some salary for whatever you are doing, and then you may have to fill certain tax forms, or you may have to get some kind of refund from the government. So again, keep this in mind, that taxation is good as far as the J1 visa is concerned, but as far as the H1 visa is concerned, you are taxed normally, so you have to pay various taxes as the other people have to do. You have to pay federal taxes, you have to pay state taxes, and so on. Essentially you are like a temporary worker, but since you are dual intent, the treatment is very much like a US worker. Now the final point is that J1 is actually better if your plan is to return back to your home country, because your case may have a situation where taxes are better off, and also you simply do not care so much about this 2-year home country requirement and so on. You simply come to your postdoctoral nursing or teaching, whatever you plan to do, and then you can go back to your home country at the end of 1 year, 2 year, or up to 5 years as the case may be. So in many cases you may get some extensions and be able to work for the whole period of 5 years on the J1 visa. For example, if you are getting the Fulbright fellowship to the US, they often give you the J1 visa, so this was there in my case. And if you are getting some teaching professor position for coming for a year for a sabbatical, again you are going to get a J1 visa. So again, in these kind of exchange visa situations, you can actually have a job in your home country, and you can come here on the J1 visa, do whatever you need to do, and go back and join the job in your home country. So under those situations, the J1 visa is very useful. But of course, if you are somebody who is looking for higher pay, who is looking for a more permanent life in the US, then I would certainly encourage you to figure out some way to get the H1 visa. However, if you are on the J1 visa and you want to go for the H1 visa or the green card, it is possible in some cases, but this is a difficult legal exercise. So do some research, find out a good immigration lawyer who is vetted by some people who have done this transformation, and then see if this person can help you in getting the H1 or the green card through the J1. So that was my take on H1 versus J1 as a PhD or postdoc, or even if you are doing nursing or teaching. And I hope this video is useful to you, and I will see you in a video sometime soon. See you then.